You've been searching for the best way to generate passive income in your life and heard that real estate is a great way to do it. But you're tired of all the so-called gurus who are all talk and no substance. Get ready to celebrate because Kevin Bupp has spent 14 years successfully making it happen. This is the Real Estate Investing for Cashflow podcast. Now, here's Kevin Bupp.
Hey guys, Kevin Bupp here, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Real Estate Investing for Cashflow podcast. Our mission is to help you build and maintain massive amounts of cash flow through income-producing real estate investments. Our guest for this week's show is a real estate investment and self-storage expert, Bill Barnhill. Now, Bill has been involved in the commercial real estate business over 41 years, having specialized for the last 24 years in self-storage. He holds a prestigious CCIM designation and has simultaneously served on the board of directors of both aviation and marine-related businesses. He is also a past president of the Alabama Real Estate Securities and Syndication Institute. He is currently president of Omega Properties, Inc., a commercial real estate management and brokerage firm located in Mobile, Alabama. He has been actively engaged with the Alabama Self-Storage Association, having served as an officer. He currently owns and manages 8 self-storage facilities with over 3,900 units and over 550,000 square feet, and has brokered over $200 million in self-storage transactions. And so, guys, there's many different topics I'd like to cover with Bill in today's show, such as what ultimately led Bill into the self-storage space to begin with, details on his very first self-storage investment, the underlying fundamentals that make self-storage an attractive investment for Bill, also his thoughts on whether it's better to purchase an existing facility or develop new. We're going to talk about purchasing distressed or mismanaged self-storage communities and whether this is a viable strategy today. We're also going to discuss what are some of the hottest self-storage markets and why. We'll talk about things such as risk of overbuilding and how to avoid it, how the management is handled both offsite and onsite. And one of the last topics that we'll hopefully cover, and we'll have time to cover, is how artificial intelligence and really automation is changing the industry and where he sees that going as well, and much, much more. So guys, I'm very excited to have a candid conversation with Bill, and I'm absolutely confident that you guys will find huge value in our time together. And so with that, just have a few items that I want to cover before we get on to the interview. First off, if this is the first time that you're tuning into the show, I want to welcome you to our family here at the Real Estate Investing for Cashflow podcast. And if you're one of millions of loyal listeners that tune in each and every week, I want to welcome you back and just thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of our family here. I know that there's thousands of other podcasts you could be listening to, but you are choosing to tune into our show. And for that, I'm very grateful. And since it's loyal listeners like you that make this all possible, I'd like to take a moment, like we do each and every week, to give a shout out to one very awesome listener who took the time to leave a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. And this one is from Ian Ryan. And Ian says, as questions arise during the podcast, Kevin does a great job to answer them immediately. The real estate industry can be confusing, but this podcast helps you navigate it. Excited to keep on listening. So, Ian, thank you for doing that. And guys, if you truly do love what we're doing here, then I would ask you kindly if you take a minute and subscribe to the show. And if you're so inclined, also leave a honest review and rating there on iTunes. And I'll be sure to give you a shout out on an up and coming episode. And just so you know, these reviews really are a way for us to attract new guests such as Bill to the show. And it's also a way for you to provide direct feedback to me. I do read these reviews. You can provide direct feedback as to maybe some topics you'd like us to cover on future shows, maybe guests you'd like to have on. So it's a way for us to actually communicate, but also to see that we're doing a good job and as well attract awesome guests like Bill. And just a couple more housekeeping items I want to go through here. I want to remind you guys of the free 30-minute phone consultation that I just started offering again after about a year hiatus, where you and I can connect on a Friday for 30 minutes. No ulterior motives here, guys. This isn't me trying to pitch anything. This is a way for you and I to connect and to discuss real estate, talk shop, okay? I used to offer these back when I started the show. I did it for about 3.5 years and then took about a year or so off, just got a little too busy. But we just started doing these again about a month or so ago, and I'd love to have the opportunity to chat with you. So, and it doesn't matter if you're brand new and haven't done a deal yet, or maybe you're a seasoned investor, right? You're on the other end of that spectrum, and you just want to talk shop. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. It gives me the opportunity to get to know you guys on a more personal level and also lend a hand where I might be able to add some advice or, just maybe act as a sounding board for you, okay? I've literally spoken to hundreds of you probably over the last 3.5 years, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to speak to hundreds and thousands of you here in the coming years. And so if you'd like to schedule that 30-minute call with me, what you'll need to do is go to kevinbupp.com and just scroll down about 3/4 of the way on the right-hand side, and there's a button that says schedule a call with Kevin. Just go ahead and click that. It will take you to my calendar link. I will tell you that it's very important that you take some time and be very specific about what you'd like to chat about. Make sure you put notes in there. If there's questions, make sure you spell them out and be very detailed so that I can be best prepared for our call together. 30 minutes goes very quickly, and I want to make sure that I'm prepped for when we jump on the phone and we can knock everything out that you'd like to chat about in those 30 minutes. So again, go to kevinbupp.com to schedule that call. One other announcement here is we're currently hiring here at my company, Sunrise Capital Investors. We've been growing at a very rapid rate over the last couple of years, and we're looking for some additional rock stars to join our team here in Tampa, Florida. So if you'd like to learn about our available opportunities and positions, you can go to careers.sunrisecapitalinvestors.com, again, to see the various positions available within our company. Now, guys, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest for today's show, Bill Barnhill. Bill, how you doing today, my friend?
Doing great in South Alabama, and thank you, Kevin, for having me on your show.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to it. I've been looking forward to it since we connected a few weeks back, Bill, and very much interested in diving into not just self-storage, but your background. You've been in this business for many, many years. Self-storage, as I'd mentioned there in your bio, for 24 years. And self-storage, I feel like, is one of those industries that it's not really all that old, right? I mean, I don't know what the true birth date of it is, but I'm going to guess that you've probably been in it for at least, half that time. So
That's about right.
Yeah, you're kind of one of the, I wouldn't say a trailblazer, but whatever follows the trailblazer. Like you're right there in the beginning stages of this thing, picking up massive momentum and growing into ultimately what is really its own standalone asset class today. So with that, Bill, before we dive into the meat and potatoes of self-storage talk here today, what I'd love for you is if you could, from your perspective, maybe give our listeners a little bit more of a background of yourself. Obviously, I shared the bio, but I'd love to hear it from your own words as well, and also maybe share how you got into self-storage.
Well, I will, Kevin. And thank you for asking that question, and I'd be glad to fill in the gaps there a little bit. I started out as a biochemist. I earned my PhD at the University of Alabama in Birmingham and did a postdoctoral fellowship. And I love that business or that career, but I had an entrepreneurial streak as well. So before I finished my PhD, it was about 1969. So I went into the Army as a chemical officer, came back, and then got my PhD. Then I looked for businesses and landed in commercial real estate. Commercial real estate is great. I was a broker for a long time, still am a broker. But what I learned about brokerage was you can have great years and down years. So I was looking for a sector that I could specialize in. Mm-hmm. And before I got out of the Army, there was a colonel. That's when I first heard about mini storage, they called it then. And I said, Colonel Wallace, what are you going to do when you retire? And he said, I'm going into the mini storage business. So that was 1969. Fast forward in 1982, I got a book and a manual, and I studied it, had interest in it. But it was serendipity that led me into the business, actually. In the late 80s, if some of you remember the Resolution Trust Corporation, the government entity that was set up to handle the disposal of hundreds or thousands probably of S&L properties, about 900 S&Ls went under. So I went to an auction and went to bid on an office building, and a power company outbid us. But we had the money placed to do this bidding, and a piece of property came up that I was aware of, but I didn't know it was in the auction process because there were hundreds of properties being auctioned. And we bought it really for like 38 cents a square foot, and it was a $3 square foot property. A couple of partners did that with me, and we built storage on it. Mm-hmm. And we had it about 40% leased and sold it to a REIT. And I said, this is a great business. I think this is a niche I've been looking for. So from there, I bought a small one and added on to it. And ever since then, I've been building, buying, and I've sold a few along the way. So that circuitous route is the way I was led into the storage business.
Okay. I appreciate you sharing that background with us. And there's something that you made a mention of there that I'd like to hit on real quick before we move on is you said you were looking for something to specialize in, right? And so from your perspective, I'd love to gain some insight as to why you thought it was important to kind of look for one thing to specialize in versus being a jack of all trades, and I'm on the same wavelength with you. I mean, we specialize mostly in mobile home communities. That's our niche. I've owned other types of real estate over the years and enjoy many other different types, but we see that there's a lot of value in us being the specialist and the experts in one particular niche. And I think you probably feel the same way, but I'd love to really gain your perspective on why you felt that was so important.
Well, it was important to me because someone once said, and it's been said many times, find something that you like, that you can do well, and do it the best you can. So storage has a lot of benefits, I think. If you've heard of lower maintenance, one nice thing is you raise your rents. It's with a 30-day notice, unlike a lot of other sectors in real estate. It's a growing industry. And that's some of the things that really attracted it to me. But as far as the specialization, I think it just fit me to a T.
You made a mention of that very first property, and so if I understood correctly, that was an actual ground up development, right?
That was.
Okay. So you cut your teeth on a little bit more challenging type of investment versus, what most would classify as a higher risk investment, being that it was ground up development, and you took some time before you can actually have a product that could be leased up. And so, have you really followed that path for the most part over the years, as far as ground up development versus buying existing facilities?
Well, I've done both, but I will say on that first one, I was smart enough to know that I wasn't smart enough to do that by myself for the first one. So I found a guy who I knew who was developing storage, and we did that first one together.
Okay.
So then I learned as I went along, and I'm still learning.
Okay. So you'd made a mention of one of the attractive factors, the ability to raise rents with a 30-day notice, ease of maintenance, right? There's a number of factors that ultimately have attracted you to this niche, and that essentially are the underlying fundamentals that attract a lot of folks to this niche. Can you maybe speak to some of the other, attraction factors that really have not only took you there in the first place 24 years ago, but have kept you there for the last 24 years?
Well, Kevin, when I started in the business, you could develop a property, a storage property, and run an ad in the Yellow Page and rent it up in 6 months. Of course, these were smaller. You had a lot of demand. You had a growing demand then because maybe less than half of the people really knew what self-storage was. So there was a learning curve for customers or tenants in that they had to learn about self-storage. So you had plenty of demand there to fill them up. But I think that what I like about this business is the ability to grow your net operating income. And there are a lot of people who have, let me back up and say, this was not the darling of real estate at one time. It was kind of the ugly stepsister, if you use a Cinderella metaphor. And now, as you know, many equity funds and REITs, and there's just a lot of money chasing cash flow. And because the cash flow is so good and self-storage, then there's plenty of equity out there. And that's driven values up, that and the ability to raise your rents and to grow your NOI.
And us Americans are never going to get rid of our junk, are we?
I don't think so. It's different, or has been different in Europe. But someone once wrote, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, an article years ago called The Psychology of Stuff. And it was about Americans that have a lot of things and they don't want to get rid of them. You inherit them and you store them. And so that's part of the basis for this business. But a lot of it is a commercial. A lot of commercial businesses use storage as well.
So being that you've been on the development side a good bit, what are some of the leading indicators that you've utilized over the years to make a determination that a market has a demand for new product? If you're going to go build another 300 or 400 storage units on one site, what's that due diligence process look like? How do you ultimately get to the final decision of, yes, this is a viable project, and ultimately we expect a lease up time period of X number of months? How do you arrive
Right.
at that?
Well, what you have to realize for self-storage is your marketplace is 3 to 5 miles in radius. Sometimes
Okay.
not just a radius, sometimes it can be a polygon. So you want to study that particular market. And what you're looking for is a certain population, a lot of houses, of course, and an area that's growing, maybe where there's new jobs being created. For instance, in Mobile, we have a Walmart big warehouse and an Amazon big warehouse just going in, and some other industry. So it's a growing area as well. So you look for growth and you do your study. You do a feasibility study. And what I like to do as a rule of thumb, and I do most of these myself, although there are people with $7,000 or $10,000 that do one for you, is I go out and I look at how much storage, what is the supply in that 3 to 5 mile market area, and what are the rents. And then I look at the number of the population there, the number of people. And then I can use a rule of thumb to say there should be X amount of demand with these number of people, and will there be excess demand over and above the number of storage units that are there.
Mm-hmm. If you don't mind sharing, what is that rule of thumb? Is that something fairly simple you can share on the show?
Yeah.
Or?
A few years ago, the Self-Storage Association did some studies, and this rule of thumb can vary, but it's something like 10 square feet per person,
Okay,
or 1 out of 10 families, but that's very general. In some places, it's higher. Some places, it's less than that. But you get a sense of it, and most of my ownership is in the Mobile area, so I'm very familiar with it. Whereas if I go into a new area, I might hire someone to do that for me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you were to, for those that are listening in, if they're not intimately familiar with their immediate marketplace or whatever marketplace they would be looking into, either develop or purchase existing self-storage stock, is that information readily available? Meaning, like, is the data available to where one could just go purchase maybe, information on all the facilities in one given market, the current occupancy rate across the board, and maybe even some determinations on how much additional product might be needed based on those factors? I mean, is that readily available, or is it really more manual due diligence that one would have to do in a new market?
Well, it's available for a cost. Yardi, YARDI, and other companies specialize in that, as well as other sectors of real estate, and providing that information. So for instance, you can get they'll give you a map showing where all the storage facilities are in a particular market and what the rents are. And so it's very helpful if you're going into a market to buy that. Also, there's general information from the Self-Storage Association that you can get as a member, free if you're a member.
Mm-hmm. Got it. I know that, some of the attractive elements of self-storage is the a little bit more ease of management. I mean, when you're comparing it to maybe like a multifamily property or an office building of sorts, the management is much less intensive. I mean, folks are just storing their stuff there, right? I mean, the staffing requirements are much more minimal. With that being said, do you feel that there's still an opportunity to find mismanaged facilities out there? Again, I know there's third-party management companies that are experts in this space, and again, it's not rocket science to run one of these facilities correctly. But with that, do you find often that there's distressed facilities due to mismanagement that come available?
Well, I see that all the time as a broker, because we handle a lot of brokerage properties in 5 states in the Southeast.
Mm-hmm.
So it surprises me that there's so many mom and pops that really don't know some of the basic essentials of managing a storage facility. And the main mistake I see them making is they would rather be 95% occupied at a lower rent than be 88% occupied and have a higher rent.
Mm-hmm.
They think full is better, but what's better is more income.
Sure.
But you see, and for instance, I just bought one, and it's not far from Mobile. And a friend of mine had been negotiating. He's an apartment developer, and he wanted to do storage and asked me to do it with him. And we got into the due diligence, and I was not a broker on this one, just a principal. And we found that there were a lot, maybe 25 or 30% of the units were rented at 1/2 to 3/4 of the market rate.
Wow.
So when we took the property over November the 1st, We didn't do it immediately, but now we're in the process of raising those rents and getting them closer to the market rate. So what that does, Kevin, is that creates more revenue, more net operating income, and more value, because most people probably understand cap rates and not net operating incomes who are listening. But a kind of a rule of thumb is for a market cap rate, and you know this, and many of you do, that you take the net operating income divided by the cap rate to get a value. And the cap rate, for instance, cap rates have been running last year, in the 5s and 6s, depending on where you are, or maybe 7 or 7.5. So you take your income after expenses and divide it by that cap rate, and that gives you a value.
So very easy to force the appreciation, whereas comparing it to like a multifamily apartment where you typically would have like an annual lease, if you found something like that had below market rents, number one, you're going to have to wait till the lease renewal period in order to raise the rents. And number two, you're probably going to have to make some improvements to that unit, some costly improvements to justify the rent increase. Whereas with your facilities, with a standard self-storage facility, while you might have to make some capital improvements, they're probably minimal in comparison to that of a interior of an apartment unit. And so, and plus you can do that rent increase or realize that upside in a much shorter period of time, being that I know you'd mentioned that most states require only a 30-day notice to do a rent increase. And I'm guessing that a majority of folks probably don't want to move their junk, because ultimately, if they want to take the time and energy to move their stuff from your location because you're about to raise rents, is really what it comes down to is they're going to take the time and energy to move it somewhere else that's probably the same rate as what your rents are going to. So
that's correct. So
yeah,
I think that it's really a great way to create value. You can do it with other types of real estate, but I think this one has that advantage of being able to raise your rates sooner rather than later.
Got it. What do you feel, and I know that you're mostly in the Mobile market, but being that you've had your fingers in this niche for many, many years, you've probably consulted with lots of different buyers in multiple different marketplaces on the brokerage side. What do you feel today, just from a high level, what are some of the hotter self-storage markets and why?
Well, the South and the West have been really hot. In the South, cities like Nashville, Charlotte, Atlanta, Tampa, Orlando, those are growth areas. And that's where there's been a lot of development. After the Great Recession, there was very little development for several years. So there was a pent-up demand being created during those years of no new development or very little new development. So now, say, starting several years ago, there's been a lot of development. I've got some figures on how much new development I could go over with you later has happened from 2016 till now. Just for instance, the percentage of the inventory of available self-storage in 2016, it increased by 1.6%. 2017, 3.4%. Last year, 4.2%. And it will slow down a little bit this year of about 4%. And when you consider the total number of square feet in the country, which I don't have that number in my head right now, but that's a lot of square footage coming online.
Wow.
So the other areas in the West, Dallas and Austin and Phoenix and Portland, those are great areas. So I think what's behind that, there's been a lot of migration to coastal areas and to areas where there's new industry being created. And these are the cities where the growth is really following that, the storage development's following that growth.
It kind of leads me to another question I have, and that's, in our space, so in the manufactured housing space, one of the things that attracted us to this niche many years ago were the pretty significant barriers to entry, in that municipalities they don't like them. They've got a bad rep. And so it's very difficult to get new supply approved. In fact, it's nearly impossible to get new supply approved. And so you see very little new communities being built. In fact, it's the only asset class that has a diminishing supply. So there's more mobile home communities that get redeveloped or shut down every year than that get built new. And so I like that. I don't have to worry about, if I buy a great existing community in a good marketplace, I don't have to worry about a competitor buying that 12-acre parcel down the road and building a new community. With the self-storage side, how does one, with all this growth happening, number one, do you feel that there is a risk of overbuilding? And if so, How does one avoid that? And how do you mitigate that risk?
Kevin, there's always a risk of overbuilding. And I've always said two greatest risks to self-storage: one, overbuilding. Number two is rising interest rates. Mm-hmm. You can do something about the rising interest rates if you lock in a 7 to 10 year term. With self-storage, you're right on by saying, look for a property that has barriers to entry. And that can be zoning issues, as with your mobile home parks, mm-hmm. or it can be price, or it can be any other thing. So you look for something with barriers to entry to try to reduce risk of someone building a mile or half a mile away from you. Mm-hmm. And you can do that somewhat. But I know that as a broker, we talk about some people have a storage and it's been doing great for a long time. And they said, why should I sell it? But one of the things we do is we have a little model that shows there are 4 facilities in a 5-mile radius. And what happens if someone builds a new facility that's 100,000 square feet? It dilutes the market there. If you have the same demand, then all of these stores that were 90 or 95% now would be 70 or 75%. Mm-hmm. So that can hurt your value. And that's one way people are encouraged to sell, because they don't think about that. They've been happy for years, mm-hmm. but now there's a lot of new development going on most everywhere, not just in these major cities. It's happening in the panhandle of Florida and smaller cities there. It's happening in the suburbs of Atlanta.
Okay. Hey guys, Kevin Bupp here with Sunrise Capital Investors. As you are hopefully already well aware if you've been a listener for any period of time, my goal has always been to provide you with as much value as I possibly can through my 2 podcasts, Real Estate Investing for Cashflow and the Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. As our audience continues to grow, literally, we've been downloaded millions of times by folks in over 125 countries. I've had thousands of people reach out looking to get involved in our niche. And that's the phenomenal niche of mobile home park investing. For those that don't know, I've been a full-time real estate investor for nearly 20 years now, and I've personally invested in and have owned apartment complexes, various commercial properties, hundreds of single-family rentals, and I've interviewed some of the most successful investors in just about every other asset class, and I've arrived at this one very simple conclusion. Mobile home parks are hands down the best investment I've found to date. Why? They provide investors with the best risk-adjusted returns out of any other real estate sector that I've seen. Investing in real estate can get complicated, and I really want to simplify this process for you. If you're someone who wants to diversify away from the uncertainty of Wall Street and allocate a percentage of your real estate portfolio to mobile home parks, but maybe you don't have the time nor the inclination to personally locate good deals yourself, then our team will do it for you. At Sunrise Capital Investors, our team specializes in the acquisitions and management of undervalued and highly profitable mobile home parks. And we are now providing accredited investors with an opportunity to participate directly alongside our team in our up-and-coming deals. And let me say this, I believe that we are hands down the best in our space at sourcing highly profitable off-market deals. That's really what makes us unique in this niche and as investment managers. As stewards of your capital, we truly are aligned with our investors. We've structured our investment fund so that we as a company are incentivized in the same way the investor is, which is through the performance of the investment itself. In addition, we want to make sure that we not only make money for our investors, but that they understand how it's being made. That's why we provide our accredited partners with a private monthly podcast that walks them through the detailed updates on how their investment is performing. And we're very transparent, providing you with the good, the bad, and the ugly at times. And so if you'd like to learn more about the partnership opportunities with our team here at Sunrise, please go visit sunrisecapitalinvestors.com and click on the investors link to get signed up. It's absolutely free and you'll get placed on the priority list of when new opportunities come along. Also, feel free to call us at 833-CASHFLOW without the O. Again, that's 833-CASHFLOW without the O. And one of our investor relations team members will help you schedule an appointment to speak with one of our managing principals. If you have questions, go ahead and schedule a call and let's get on the phone and talk. And with that, guys, I like to leave with one last thought. From the time that I wake up in the morning till the time that I lay my head down the rest of the evening, my number one priority with everything I do, whether it be recording this podcast, working for our investors,
helping each of you reach your investment goals, to providing a great experience to each of our residents who reside in our communities, is to add huge amounts of value to everyone that I come in contact with. Now, with that being said, I look forward to the opportunity of bringing value to you through Sunrise and through this podcast. Thank you for your time. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the show.
That kind of leads me on to another topic I was hoping to cover is, this industry started out as mom and pop. In fact, when a lot of folks I speak to that ask about the manufactured housing industry, I kind of compare it to self-storage in that self-storage, it started out very mom and pop, and it still has a very strong element of mom and pop operators still out there. However, it's been consolidated by a lot of big operators, private equity firms, and that consolidation is continuing to happen, right? There's a lot more sophistication in space than what existed probably 24 years ago when you got into it. The same thing is kind of playing out in the mobile home park space now. Lots of private equity firms, multiple REITs in our space, and driving cap rates down, prices up, and the demand for the product is sky high. Unfortunately, we're not creating a new supply, so it's getting constrained fairly quickly. With that being said, are there any statistics out there relating to how many, what we would classify as mom and pop operators still exist? Meaning like those individuals that own maybe one or maybe two facilities at the most?
I've seen those statistics, Kevin. I think it's still somewhere around half or more are still small owners with 2 or 3 properties or less. So that's kind of, although I remember a few years ago, it was 10% REITs and other, and then it went to 20. And I don't have that number on the tip of my tongue at the time, but there's more and more consolidation going on because there's just so many of these companies or private equity firms as well wanting to buy these. And it gets very enticing for people to sell when they can make a lot of money from holding something they've had for 3, 4, 5, 10 or more years.
Sure. And I see it as a good thing, right? It's really a double-edged sword. And it is in our space as well. In our space, I see it as it's a negative because they're driving, prices up very high, which makes it a little more challenging for us to, get better value on the front side of it. However, on the flip side, when it comes time for us to exit out of our portfolio, we have a lot more opportunity to sell a package of properties to a larger institutional owner that can pay premium dollars for it. Whereas maybe 20 years ago in our space, you'd have to probably piecemeal properties if you wanted to sell them, one to this guy, one to that guy. And right. I'm guessing probably the same thing really exists in the self-storage space, although it's many years ahead of where we're at currently in the mobile home park space. So again, pros and cons of the big boys and the consolidation factor. Can look at it from many different angles. But I guess what I gather, from your feedback there is that there's still opportunity for smaller operators that want to get into the space and want to get their piece of the pie.
Well, that's true. As a broker, we deal with a lot of small operators, that have 1, 2, or 3, and sometimes new people as well. And as I mentioned earlier, the guy that helped me build the first one, the developer, was very beneficial to get me started in this business. And so I've always shared what I've learned in the process with new people, try to take some time with them, if they ask questions, and I point them in the right direction. So there's plenty of room for more people to get into this because we have, it's interesting to note that demand, although there's a lot of new product development, the demand is keeping pace. And that's a new statistic we know about. And it has a lot to do with household growth, which is around 1.5%. So as long as households are really growing, that creates more business for storage. And millennials, I would mention too. New statistic is that 28% of the users are now, 28% of millennials use storage. As you know, they're not interested in owning anything. They want to lease everything. And 44% of them cite moving because they're so mobile is their main reason for using storage.
Yeah, that's great. Technology is a good thing for the most part, and I know that just comparing the self-storage space to manufactured housing, you guys are a little bit more advanced, even as far as the software that you use. I mean, we're behind the times a little bit. I think we'll all admit it, at least in our industry, we just are. We're kind of not even barely nipping at the heels of the multifamily space as far as sophistication, but we're trying. We're getting there. We're a small industry, but with that, being that you guys are a little bit more advanced with technology, are there some helpful advances that have happened over the years with regards to the pricing and just the overall management software. And in my mind, I'm thinking of, dynamic pricing models, things to where, rents, you can adjust rents every 30 days, right? Based on the demand or your current occupancy of your product, of your facility. Does that exist today to where these things adjust on a, every 30 day, every month basis to where you're making sure that you are getting the highest and best price in that given marketplace?
Well, if I understand your question, I think that you want to create value by growing your net income. And we're in the process right now. We try to, if the market was standing, we try to do a rental rate increase about every year. It might not be a lot. It might be $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 on a 10 by 10 climate control unit. So, and we're not the only ones doing that. The real leaders of that are the larger REITs, where they use algorithms, and we do as well too, to help us with deciding what those rents should be and to automatically institute those new rents.
Got it. In your own facilities, Bill, do you have your own property management company, or is this an opportunity to outsource to a third-party management firm to handle?
Well, we've always managed our own. And in fact, before 2008 and the recession, we had formed a third-party management company, which did rather well. But then the other larger companies, most of the REITs got their own third-party management company, and it became very, very competitive. So I sold that element of the business. But we still manage our own. And it's probably, if I got much larger, I might turn that over to a larger, somebody like Life Storage or Extra Space, because they have certain economies of scale in their management, which we wouldn't have. But it's being local, I know this market, and I could probably do a better job here than possibly they would. But if I got in a different market, I would certainly go to someone like that.
Okay. So that's great. I'm glad we brought that up. So for maybe someone that's listening into the show, maybe they're looking at buying their first facility and maybe it's out of their immediate marketplace, or, even if it was in their marketplace, they don't necessarily have an interest in, overseeing the property management. There are some options out there with third-party management companies that could probably do a slightly better job, if not a much better job than they might be able to. You've got a lot of experience in this space, but a brand new person has a lot to learn, right? Lots of roadblocks along the way to become as efficient as you might be after 24 years in the space.
That's right, because there's a lot more to know about managing than meets the eye. For instance, how and when to raise your rents. We talked about that. Just, for instance, use of credit cards. A typical property might have credit card fees that we pay of $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 a month. So we bid that out every year, and most people don't do that. If you're large enough, you can collectively save yourself a lot of money by bidding that out every year to 2 or 3 companies.
I ran across, I don't know where I saw, maybe a friend sent it to me. There was maybe it's not new technology. To me, it was new because I've never seen it before, but he sent me a brochure from a company. It was a construction company that specializes in self-storage construction, but they had a product that essentially would take a single story, older vintage building and literally build you think of it as like scaffolding around it and then add a second floor to it and create, literally double the storage space. Have you seen anything like that? It seemed pretty interesting in the brochure. It was a color brochure. It was just a rendering. It wasn't an actual project that was completed, but it seemed very basic in nature. But it seemed like a brilliant idea in order to, when you've got a limited footprint, when you can't necessarily go wide, you have to go up without having to tear down the existing facility that's there. Have you seen anything like that play out?
Well, Kevin, I've read about that. It's happening on a very limited basis. I don't know in our market area that have done that, but I know it has been done.
Okay.
And particularly if you have a really great site and you need more space, you can go up and over it. But that would probably be an all climate control facility to make that practical.
Got it. Okay. I know that very briefly when we had a discussion a couple of weeks back, Bill, we talked about kind of some of the changes that are happening in the industry with, as far as automation is concerned. And I'm assuming artificial intelligence is starting to make its way into your industry as well. But From a standpoint of where you see the industry going, we can maybe use your facilities as an example. Do you think there will ever be a point in time in the next 5 or 10 years to where you truly won't need someone there on site? You won't need a manager or any staff there to where someone could literally walk up to a kiosk, which I know kind of exists today, but you could literally walk in, not have to deal with anybody, get to their facility, store their stuff, and walk away. And do you see it getting to that point anytime soon?
Well, it's happening now, although I think your larger facilities, it may be much longer before that happens. But there's several companies I know who are doing that and starting from scratch, building and acquiring properties and putting in kiosks. And one of the statistics I learned at the last storage meeting in Maryland was that only about, it was a small percentage, maybe 9 or 10% of the people who come in and use their kiosk, they use their online rental from their cell phone, or they call the call center. So they have these, and anyone can have those features at any property. But if you're going without a manager, you want a kiosk, you want the call center, and you want the ability to actually rent and sign your lease and do all the negotiations of the contract online. And for instance, there's one of the major REITs has something, I think they call it Rent Online Now or something like that. And we're in the process of doing that as well, because even if you have a manager, it still helps. If someone can go on with their iPhone and I have at least 60% use their cell phone rather than a desktop or an iPad, they can go on and rent any time of the day. They can rent one any time of the day or night. That and other things that are happening is in the security area, with the gate systems that integrate with your software. Your management software is getting better and better, and they use, I guess you would say, you mentioned artificial intelligence. They use revenue rules or algorithms to help manage that software and see who will rent. The other things we do is a lot of Google AdWords. Most people are familiar with that, where you advertise on Google and drive people to your website.
That's the new Yellow Pages, right?
It is, and very few people still use the Yellow Pages. I know we used to spend an awful lot of money on the Yellow Pages, even more, a good bit more than we do for our AdWord campaigns.
Even today, in today's world, you still do?
No, we don't use the Yellow Pages anymore.
Okay, got it.
So, but we say 10 years ago, we spent a lot more Yellow Pages than we do now on this computer management software and advertising.
Yeah. Well, I remember about 12 years ago, prior to the recession, I looked at a number of facilities and we had considered, getting into the niche. And I remember one of the interesting marketing strategies that folks used. This is back when the Yellow Pages were still relevant, right? They still had relevance in the space. Although AdWords did exist, you were still, kind of king of the hill if you were at the front of the Yellow Pages. And the strategy was to make your company name start with an A, right? So you saw AAA self-storage or AAAA self-storage. That way, alphabetically, you're in the very beginning.
That's right. The first 3 pages in the mobile phone book, first one, second one, and the third one on the back. And we had all our properties collectively on there, with maps.
Yeah.
So that way you can dominate, if you can dominate a market, even though it's a small market, that gives you some selective advantage.
Got it. What information that you feel is relevant might we have missed here today regarding self-storage investments?
Well,
I think we covered a lot, but I'm sure there's something that we might have missed out on.
I think that looking at what's happening in our population, what's happening generally speaking, who wants to rent properties? I mean, who are the prospects for renting? What are the migration patterns in the population? We touched on that. Now I think everybody's got to realize how the economic cycle affects all investments. We're 10 years running now into this recovery. How much longer will that last? And should we slide into a recession, even though mild recession? How could that affect my finance, if you start a construction project with a construction loan, and how would that affect the interest rate when you come to put the full amortizing loan on it? How will it affect the rent up? So I think just general economics is something that you would want to keep in mind, because it's easy to get blinded about how well self-storage does and how good things are now. And that's generally true in just about every investment. But you got to think a little bit ahead of the curve.
Yeah. How did, during the actual, not following, 2008, but ultimately, like during the heat of the moment, how did self-storage fare as far as the construction of new properties and even, lease ups of ones that were, just breaking ground?
Well, I think I mentioned that new development was really at a standstill during the recession.
Yep.
However, as a sector, and I'm speaking nationally, self-storage did really well. It dropped a few percent, but nothing like the other sectors of offices or any other sectors of real estate. Here in our market area, we dropped just a little bit, but not much. It was not really that significant. I think we couldn't grow our rents like we had been doing, but we didn't. We've just lost maybe a little bit of occupancy, because consider if someone lost their job, a lot of people did, unfortunately. So some of them would double up and maybe go home. Young people would go back and live with their parents, or they lost their house and went into an apartment. So that created additional demand for storage. Okay. But then some of these people couldn't pay.
Yeah.
But so overall, as severe as that recession was, storage came through it and out of it really well.
Okay. An interesting, question that's always been burning. I'm going to get the chance to ask it right now, Bill, is the TV show Storage Wars. Is that staged, or does that really happen? Do you guys find, when you have to do your auctions, number one, do you have, I guess, treasure seekers coming to your facilities for these auctions? And ultimately, does it play out like they show on TV?
I hate to say too much about how they handle that. The way we do it, we don't find these great treasures. And in fact, you're very limited when you cut someone's lock, which you can do after 30 days under our state law, but you can't go in it. You have to have a witness there. It's very documented as to how you handle that. So no one knows really what's in there if you can't see it, because it might be in boxes or in the back. So I'm sure that some of those are for real, and I hate to comment too much on that, but I have a feeling that maybe they film more episodes than they actually use.
Sure. You're probably right.
But I know, I'll tell you, one time I met a guy who wrote the script for one of those, and it was on the airplane going to a Self-Storage Association meeting. And I said, I saw one of these just the other day on TV, and this goes back about 10 years, whenever they were first starting. And I said, there was a very nice facility in Southern California, beautiful, beautiful facility. And they opened the unit up and roaches went everywhere.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, that's terrible. And I said, that was terrible for that owner of that storage facility on national TV to experience that. And he said, well, we're rewriting a script. We don't want that to happen again. So that's about all I will say about them. But it's been a very interesting show. And it's what one thing it has done, it made people aware of these storage lien sales. And so we've always gotten a lot more turnout for them than we used to get.
Okay. I thought you were going to tell me like you found Porsches and other, collectible items in those over the years, but doesn't sound like that might be the case.
Well, we found a Mercedes-Benz one time, but it wouldn't run.
Sure. Got it. Well, fantastic. Well, you shared a lot of great information here today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. And now I'd like to enter in what I call the Golden Nugget segment of the show. And this is also what we're going to work towards wrapping things up here for the day. I'd like to ask if you had just one final golden nugget of advice or wisdom that you can leave with our listeners that may inspire and motivate them as they progress in their real estate investing career. What would that one last golden nugget be?
Well, everybody reads about goal setting, so I don't want to be trite about that. But set your goals. And my one word for that's preparation. Be prepared for anything you do and have a contingency plan if things don't go the way you want it to or the way you expect it to do. So there's, you could talk for hours about that, but my golden nugget is preparation. As it's, compare it to the great football coaches, Coach Saban being our coach. I'm a graduate of the University of Alabama. And I try to learn a lot from him and these other coaches and the way they prepare young men for leadership and get them to buy into, preparation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, speaking to the contingency plan, if you can have more than one contingency plan, the better, I feel. If you can have you got the plan A, but if you can have a plan B, plan C, plan D, the more contingency backup plans you have, typically the better. Yeah. So, well, Bill, this has been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you coming to the show. And folks, if you'd like to learn more about Bill and his company, I've got 2 different websites I'm going to share with you here. And also I'll be including those in the show notes. The first one is OmegaPropertiesInc.com. And then also you can go find him over at selfstorage.com. Again, OmegaPropertiesInc.com and selfstorage.com. And Bill, that's all we have for today. Again, really appreciate you joining us here on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. And I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Well, Kevin, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it very much.
Congratulations! Now you've got more of the best tricks of the trade in building massive amounts of passive income from real estate. For more amazing resources, visit realestateinvestingforcashflow.com. And we'll see you next Monday morning.